History of my oldest ancestors of whom I am very proud descend. July 6, 1189, is released from captivity Eleanor of Aquitaine, my 28th grandmother, 3 times my grandmother, Queen Consort of France and England, Duchess of Aquitaine, Countess of Poitiers, one of the richest and most powerful women of the age media, mother of the kings of England, Ricardo I Lionheart and João Landless, and great-grandmother of Dom Afonso III, King of Portugal, my 25th and 26th grandfather. Eleanor of Aquitaine, Queen Consort of France and England, Duchess of Aquitaine, Countess of Poitiers was born in Bordeaux on April 1, 1122 and died in Poitiers on March 31, 1204. She was the daughter of William X, the Saint, Duke of Aquitaine, and Eleanor of Châteauroux, paternal granddaughter of William IX, the Troubadour, Duke of Aquitaine, *1071, 1126, and Matilda Philippa of Toulouse, and maternal granddaughter of Amerigo I, Viscount of Cataleralt and Morbihan of Isle. Bouchard. Eleanor of Aquitaine was one of the richest and most powerful women of the Middle Ages, having been Duchess of Aquitaine and Countess of Poitiers in her own suo jure right. She was also Queen Consort of France from 1137 to 1152, as wife of Louis VII, King of France, and then Queen of England from 1154 to 1189, as wife of Henry II Plantagenet, in addition to being matriarch of the dynasty Plantagenet, who ruled England between 1154 and 1485. She was the eldest daughter of William X of Aquitaine, whom she succeeded in 1137, and Eleanor of Châteauroux. Eleanor of Aquitaine was the patron of important literary figures such as Bernard de Ventadorn, Wace, and Bernard de Saint-Maur, as well as several Catholic religious orders and congregations such as the Abbey of Fontevraud. He led armies several times during his life and was one of the leaders of the Second Crusade. Upon becoming Duchess of Aquitaine at the age of 14, Eleanor became the most sought-after bride in Europe, having married, 3 months after becoming Duchess, King Louis VII of France, with whom she had 2 daughters. As Queen of France, Eleanor took part in the Second Crusade, traveling to Palestine leading the army of Aquitaine and Poitou against the forces of Islam. After 15 years as Queen of France, she asked Pope Eugene III for an annulment of her marriage, an annulment granted on March 21, 1152. Based on the couple's consanguinity, they were 4th cousins. Her 2 daughters were declared legitimate and their custody was granted to Louis, while Eleanor's lands were returned to her. Shortly after the annulment, Eleanor married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou on the 18th of May, 1152 in Poitiers Cathedral. 2 years later, at Christmas 1154, she and her husband, now Henry II, were crowned King and Queen of England at Westminster Abbey in London. During the first 13 years of marriage, Henry and Eleanor had 8 children. However, in 1171, they fell out over his extramarital affairs, and he ended up arresting her in 1173 for supporting the revolt of her sons Henry, Richard, and Geoffrey against their father. Eleanor was only released on July 6, 1189, when her husband died and her second son Richard Lionheart ascended the throne of England. As Queen Mother, Eleanor acted as regent of England and Normandy when Richard went on the Third Crusade, having negotiated his ransom when he was imprisoned in Austria. Upon the accession of her son João Landless, in 1199, Leonor participated in the last battles to guarantee her permanence on the throne. And after an intense life of 82 years, being Queen of France and England consecutively, she took the veil at the Abbey of Fontevraud, where she ended up dying as a nun on March 31, 1204. Biography. Eleanor of Aquitaine was born into the most literate and cultured court of her time. His grandfather was William IX, the Troubadour, Duke of Aquitaine, one of the first troubadours and vernacular poets. He was also an extremely cultured man, who passed on his taste for culture to his heir son William X, who, in turn, offered an exceptional education to his 2 daughters. Leonor and Petronilla were fluent in around 8 languages, learned mathematics and astronomy, and discussed laws and philosophy together with the doctors of the church. This education, exceptional because they were women and at a time when most rulers were illiterate, allowed them to develop a critical spirit and political sagacity, useful especially to Leonor, who would govern herself. William X also enjoyed involving his heir Leonor in the various aspects of governance, taking her on visits throughout his territories. Family and descent. From Eleanor of Aquitaine's first marriage to Louis VII, King of France, my 29th and 31st grandfather, they had 2 daughters. Marie de Franca, who married Count Henry I of Champagne and Troyes in 1164, my 27th grandparents, twice my grandparents. Alice of France, who married Count Theobald V of Blois and Chartres in 1164. From Eleanor of Aquitaine's second marriage to Henry II of England, my 28th grandfather, 3 times my grandfather, they had 8 children. William IX, Count of Poitiers, died aged 3 from convulsions. Henry, co-king of England, who married Margaret of France, with no surviving children. Matilda, Duchess of Saxony, who married Henry the Lion, Duke of Saxony and Bavaria. Richard I of England, Lionheart, who married Berengaria of Navarre. Geoffrey II, Duke of Brittany, who married Constance, Duchess of Brittany. Leonor Plantagenet, Queen of Castile, who married Alfonso VIII, King of Castile, my 27th grandparents, 3 times my grandparents. Joan, Queen of Sicily, who first married William II of Sicily, with no surviving children. She married for the second time with Raimondo VI of Toulouse, with descendants. Joël Landless, who married Isabel de Angoulême. Eleanor of Aquitaine was the grandmother of King Henry III of England, great-grandmother of Edward I of England, great-great-grandmother of Edward II of England, great-great-grandmother of Edward III of England, great-grandmother of Richard II of England. And he is the ancestor of all the British monarchs of the dynasties subsequent to the Plantagenet, of all the kings of the House of Lancaster and the House of York, both branches of the Plantagenet dynasty. As well as the Tudor dynasty, the result of the union between the Lancaster and Yorks of Welsh origin, the Scottish House of Stuart, the German House of Hanover and the House of Windsor, including the current King Charles III of England. Through her daughter Eleanor Plantagenet, Princess of England, my 27th grandmother, 3 times my grandmother, Eleanor of Aquitaine is the ancestor of all the Iberian and French royal houses. The granddaughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine, Berengaria of Castile, my 26th grandmother, 3 times my grandmother, inserted her blood into the Spanish royal lineage. Her other granddaughter Blanche of Castile became Eleanor of Aquitaine, ancestor of all the kings of France from Louis IX of France onwards, and by her granddaughter Dona Urraca of Castile, Queen of Portugal, my 26th and 27th grandmother, married to King Dom Afonso II of Portugal, my 26th and 27th grandfather, all the kings of Portugal from Dom Afonso III of Portugal, my 25th and 26th grandfather, descend from Leonor of Aquitaine. And through her daughter Matilda of England, Duchess of Saxony, Eleanor of Aquitaine became the ancestor of dozens of German royal and noble houses, including the houses of Habsburg, Wettin, Wittelsbach, Hohenzollern and Hesse. Through the Queen's German descendants, her blood was carried into the Scandinavian royal families. Through other lineages, Eleanor of Aquitaine is also the ancestor of most of the Italian and Slavic royal and noble houses.